on the European Constitution in France and Netherlands. At that time, once again, we said we need time for reflection. And did that increase the confidence of the European people in the European Council and the European Parliament? Well, they certainly changed their attitudes. And here I think the previous speaker is correct. If we don't change things, if we don't change this European Union to a European Union of the citizens, then it's going to fail. And we'll all be jointly responsible for that. The messages sent out over the last few days aren't messages indicating change. They're messages saying that we have to carry on with more authoritarian policies with respect to public budgets. After Greece, we're going to have to, send Greece and Spain through the mangle with more sanctions for not doing what the European Union wants them to do. And Mr. Schäuble wants that. He wants more sanctions for Spain and Portugal. If this carries on, you're going to have member states going their own way. And tensions within and without the Eurozone will continue to increase. And despite the protests of European citizens against TTIP and CETA, Mr. Juncker, it's wrong to say that CETA should not be discussed in the national parliament. I don't know what you meant when you said that. That is undemocratic. You are confirming people's beliefs about the undemocratic, non-democratic nature of the EU if you say things like that. Well, let's just leave aside discussions of changing the constitution. But as long as we see populism and shifts in Europe, political shifts in Europe, and different groupings coming and going, we don't, for the time being, need a new convention. People are fed up at the moment with Europe. The question is, what can we do now, right now? It is time for us, the member states of the European Union, to stand together and to think in terms, for example, of devising a European humanitarian aid programme, emergency programmes, which would send a message to those who have suffered most from the debt crisis in recent years that we are trying to do something for them. We want an immediate introduction of a minimum wage above the poverty threshold. We need that. And we need equal pay for equal work in the workplaces. We can do that without changing the European treaties. These are things we need to do now so that we can alleviate people's fears of becoming poorer, we can alleviate people's fears of perceived fears of refugees coming into our countries. These are things we have to do now. Give the unions their rights back. All these things we can do now. And something else, Council and Commission. Make a statement now for the young generation. Say to them, even if the UK is leaving, there is going to be a redistribution in the European budget so that there is more assistance for young people to help them get jobs, to enjoy more exchanges from country to country, and make it possible for them to have a better training in the European Union. So instead of being the sacrificial lambs of the European Union.
Mr. Carver wants to ask you a question. Mr. Carver wants to ask you a question. Go ahead.
Zimmer, House English. Don't you appreciate you've spoken here about this great wooden tower, but isn't in fact this great tower that's been built is in this place, this Tower of Babel, built on a bed of straw with its two key foundations that we hear all the time, the two pillars that represent the European Union, freedom of movement and the Eurozone. And yet the Italian banks are on the verge of an extra bailout. We see it cannot work. And the big issue here, I would contend, is contagion. You really know in your heart of hearts that the people of the European Union supported trade, but they don't support political union.
Frau Zimmer.
Well, I didn't talk about the Tower of Babel. I talk about the very poor behaviour of some of the leaders in the UK, especially the Conservative elite, who had played with wooden blocks, built a wooden tower and then knocked it down. The European Union is not a toy that you can kick against the wall and then jump around and laugh at what you've destroyed.
Für die Fraktion der Grünen hat jetzt das Wort Frau
The Greens, EFA, Mrs. Hans. Colleagues, I don't know Boris Johnson personally. I do know Nigel Farage, and I have to say that I wasn't really surprised at all with the behaviour there. The fact that he has shirked his responsibility. I expected him to do that. The situation is a lot more crucial, a lot more serious than what some of you seem to think. But still, one thing was surprising, I think, in the last few days, and that is that after the Brexit decision, in the UK, the first time that when the EU was defeated, there was an emotional discussion on the European Union. That was the first time. You can see that in the reports from the UK. Talk about people breaking down in tears about what's happened. They talk about how painful everything has been and the loss that people have felt. It's the first time we've seen that level of emotion in the UK. And what will happen now? Well, that's up to probably the new government in the UK. But the EU, of the 27 member states, will have to assert its rights and take into account what the UK wants. But when you look at the UK as a whole now, Nicola Sturgeon with her appeal and the demonstrations that took at the weekend in the UK are quite right, that our doors need to still be open to the UK. We need to remain open to them. So what can we do to establish a link with those that have been demonstrating in the UK now? The people that are against the Brexit decision. What actually happened? What's the underlying background to all of this Brexit? There's a lot of talk about neo-nationalists, populists, anti-Europeans of all kinds that simply want to fan the flames of people's concerns and scares. The fact that they're scared, they don't want to actually dissipate those fears. They want to contribute to them, and they want to keep them burning, these fires. And we need to look at other answers. People are in favour of a different way forward. But in London, this is an empire of rich people, the elite people. What about the people that have nothing? Where are they in London? What's their role in London? I mean, it's completely polarised in London itself. And people have seen that. We have to provide a response to these people that have been left out in the cold. And not leave it all up to the nationalists and the populists that might be taking things in the wrong direction. We need to look at what we can do with the financial markets, how we can regulate them, how we can mitigate them. We've come with a Green New Deal to ensure that people's prospects can be improved, that there's innovation, that there's growth. We've often talked about this in the past, that we need binding social standards throughout Europe. We need these, particularly when you see that in countries of the EU, the social security systems are simply breaking up. They're falling apart. And what really concerned me over the last few days was to see how, well, the people that are a little bit astounded or that perhaps haven't come out of this very well, that they have made little people, the ordinary person, vote against their own interests. I myself come from a very modest background, and I have to say, I despise people like Mr. Farage, Ms. Le Pen, the Van Stoffs of this world, who use the ordinary person It's rabble-rousing. I mean, the PIS group in Poland, how can they look at this? Because the UK, they've worked very well together in the past, and now they're seeing all of this fall apart. We've got to change the EU, yes, but you can only do that, you can only change the EU if you want to defend the EU, and that's the only chance to stem the tide of this rabble-rousing and neo-nationalism. Thank you. Mrs. Hunt, there's a blue card for you. Mr. Batten wants to ask you a question. Will you accept it? Okay, Mr. Batten, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. Madam Harms, you seem to be a bit contradictory in your exposition there, because you seem to be saying that it was, the EU is a construction in favour of rich people, which I would agree with, but they're very rich people at the top. And then you didn't seem to understand. Do you understand that the people who voted to leave predominantly, not all, but predominantly in the UK, were in fact those people who've been hit hardest by the European Union, who've had to bear the economic burden, the people who don't have jobs, who don't have prospects, who're seeing their living standards being driven down? Do you understand that it was those people who voted to leave? And in fact the EU is a construction for very rich people at the top, the big banks and the Goldman Sachs of this world.
Any responsibility, the central responsibility for what has happened in London, that's up to the British government, and not just the last government, but a number of preceding governments as well. The fact that they were not able to change that situation, I'm fully aware of it. To shift the blame over to Europe, causing all of this antagonism among ordinary people, that is something that's not responsible, because it's not correct. No, it's been said that corporate tax will be lowered, and the social benefits in the UK will be curtailed. That's your responsibility, that's your Brexiteer policy taking effect there.
President Obama's top economic advisor, Jason Furman, joins Michigan Congressman Sanders